Geschätzte Kolleginnen und Kollegen, I have the honor now to introduce Stephen Mutch. He's the chairman of the Physio in Sport in the UK, and he's also the lead physio at the Irish Rugby Football Union. Stephen, it's a comeback, you know. 2015, we had the pleasure to have you here, and I can tell you the Swiss people loved the man in green over the summer. We loved the spirit of the team, the values of the team. And so it's an honor to have one member of the team here. The stage is yours. Thank you very much.
That's very kind. And really, the honor's mine coming back here again. 2015 was my last time in here. Just see if this will move on. Yeah, I think we're going to move to the second device. It trialled really well earlier on. It is a pleasure being back here. There will be a few of you who are expecting Nicola Phillips, and I've heard Nicola Phillips for many times. Hopefully I'll be able to do her justice as well as the organising committee and Mario, because they've really taken care of us, and it's been a real pleasure to be able to come here straight after. Oh, I think we're in. By saying we're in, and there's Nikki, and we just got rid of Nikki, but that was her. She was in the red, there were 3 guys in white, I was one of them. Mario picked one of 3, so you got me. Session plan for today, we're going to go through just a little bit about the journey. I'm going to tell you a story. Stefan called me imperfect about half an hour ago, which is strangely quite accurate and apt for what we're going to be describing, because I'm going to tell you a story of imperfect medicine. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. We're going to look at a little bit around analysis injury, and because I've been working in rugby now for over 2 decades, there will be a strong rugby bias. We'll look at some data insights, and medics and physios generally could do with probably being a little bit more insightful around data and understanding a bit more about it. And I am by no means an expert, but we do have to call in expertise as well. And then we'll come into AI, and we'll describe a little bit around AI. Now, hopefully, I can have control of this. Oh, we're back to Nikki. We're away from Nikki. I am in control. Great. And the men in green get a lot of support from people around the world. We've got a bit of Snoop Dogg with his signed shirt here, and that's Joe Biden's first cap. So we do get international support. Great to hear the Swiss are on board as well. So I've just come back from France. We had a tournament that ran Rugby World Cup. We aspire to get all the way, and some of this is the journey plan that we had for some players within that journey. I'm talking journey. My journey started in Scotland. That's where I got my degree. I got a master's in London, started in the health service in the northwest of England, and then I flew across the world to New Zealand, skipped Australia, wisely, says Nicol, and then went back to the UK and started working within the National Health Service in public health in Edinburgh. Took my first job in sport there in the 90s. I'm now 26 years through professional sport. Dropped off in France, where I was head of performance for 3 years at Montpellier. I know we've got some Montpellier supporters here tonight. So had 3 years of head of performance there, and I'm now into my fourth year with Irish Rugby. So it's a journey of 43,000 kilometres. I don't show you this as a humble brag. It just demonstrates the number of the teams that I've been involved in, that I've got my fingers dirty with, and that I'm usually much more comfortable in shorts than I am in trousers. Moving from there, I've also been chair of the organisation Physios in Sport within the UK. Thrilled to be at another comparable conference event here. Growing up in the 1980s, about 50% of my bedroom would have been taken up with all of these devices, so I'm amazed nowadays that you can fit it all into one of these, and that I can get a photograph of you all at the front. Like that, so thanks for smiling, see that later. Who knew, however, that the rise of the phone would be so dramatic? Well, in fact, in the Tacoma news in 1953, there were predictions that there would be no escape in the future from the phones. and that we would actually have a prophecy that in the final development it would be carried about by the individual. And who knows, it may actually translate from one language to another. So there have been some incredible forward-thinking people in our time. And I'd like everyone in the audience to consider being forward-thinking and perhaps swim upstream, as we heard earlier, going forwards. But remember, there are a few people who are downstream from us as well who will prefer to reach social media ahead of any safety briefings. So try and be the upstream people. So moving into the challenge that's been set by Mario for Sports Physio 2023, do use the hashtag. It's been great for picking up some of the slides already. We've got a program here that has had us go through a journey around the complex systems in sports injury rehab. And within this, we have to look at exactly how do we rehab people. And this was our call to action for people to rehab, thinking of the individual, but also trying to get a lens in complex systems to think about our decision making. And that's going to be a big theme. We looked at traumatic muscle injury and looked in some great detail this morning, which was fascinating, will lead us on to the afternoon for sure. And then we had Carlos. Now, I picked this up off the internet and wondered just exactly what Carlos was on about. Unfortunately, my phone does the translation. And I found Carlos talks about each injury is a notch in the muscles. And I thought that was a fabulous, he's right there. I thought that was an absolutely fabulous way of describing it, because I was taught very early that the body never forgets an insult. And I think we've heard that through the microbiology and the histology today. We've had broad talk around just how do we do the diagnostics properly. And part of the problem is everyone has an opinion. He doesn't mind everyone having an opinion, but the challenge can be very much for the athlete who's bang in the center of that, even after we've moved through the destructive phase into repair and regen and into remodeling. And then this I will quote a bit later on, because this is a piece about traumatic muscle injury where we talk about the clinical management involves the accurate diagnosis, aptly described earlier on, individualized rehab planning, which was also alluded to a couple of times, and an establishment of true return to training, return to play criteria. So through some clever decision making in the future, I think all of you can actually consider your criteria a little bit better and play that pivotal part in the sport. Around 2016, this paper came out from Pascal Edouard and group and JB, and it was about the first time that we heard sprinting being described as a vaccine. Unless you're involved in track running, however, it's really challenging to be doing anything in sports when you're sprinting. And we've got a few examples of just how difficult it is to do basic tasks, never mind skill performance. Okay, so if we move into a bit of an analysis around our injury now, and particularly rugby, but also return to sport. So this was the paper that I lifted that management, looking at diagnosis, individualization. If I looked at that paper and thought, yeah, this is exactly the crux of the talk, we've got to be thinking in these areas. And I remembered back to a piece of work that was done in 2020, and it was on salvageable injuries. And this really got me thinking a couple of years ago. Salvageable injuries were defined by the Football Association in their document of 2020, where they were looking at in-competition rehab. And what they've said there's a chance for the red button. They looked at a database and effectively were looking at a salvageable injury, which is defined in English as something that can be saved. So they were looking essentially at things like 10-day international window durations or tournaments of 33 days. So that World Cup we've just completed was a 120-day tournament. So the salvageable injury is really malleable and can change. The window changes according to your circumstances. So again, highly contextual and something you'll be able to bring into any event that you're involved in. So salvageable injuries was a project I got really interested in. We wanted then to look into what exactly injuries there are, and this is a 16-year study in rugby union. And you will not see the muscle injuries just quite at the top. There's more of those joint injuries, but we see hamstrings coming in just under the line there, so above 50%. So that would certainly have a low to medium risk. And then we sort of start to see things, it's not defined around the foot, but we've got some other thigh injuries around here. This is amateur data down at the bottom picked in from South America, and they talk in rectus femoris, and they talk around hamstring for the backs, and a little bit less in terms of the forwards. So two different positions in rugby union, essentially two different groups of players, slightly different injury profiles. Nicole's done a great bit of work on this dashboard to show us what our injury profile was, and we've stuck up the no tweeting as it's inevitably our data. But we can see at the top of those injuries in here, the injury location, Oh, I think I'm just about to lose this. The injury locations here, we again come up with a lot of hamstring, and hamstring showing a bit of a trend towards a 4-year high for us, but the areas like hip and groin are actually on the decrease for us at the moment. We put quite a bit of work into that. But you can see just a few numbers in terms of the quadriceps anterior thigh. But even the average days in treatment and rehab, the biggest ones are based around the wrist and the joint problems there, with some based around our hamstring injury. So those are the sort of injuries that we would see. Looking at hamstring injury a bit closer, when we've got two of our colleagues within Irish Rugby, Fergal and Gareth, who looked into what the injury profiles looked like. And they found it wasn't just sprinting. There was also kicking, and there's also an area called rucking within the game where the players might find their knees extended or almost extended, bent over at the trunk. So rucking would be an area where we needed optimal coaching as well as optimal loading, but it makes good sense for us to have that in mind for our athletes who are returning to sport. And then we looked at kicking, because inevitably a number of our players will kick, and no surprise, the highest number of the players who got injured more often were those that kicked more often, at around 21% of anterior thigh injury. So I talked about decision-making becoming key, and that really is, because there's 35,000 decisions that you'll make in a day. Of those, there'll be about 10,000 which will be essentially deemed trivial. 227 on the right there fascinates me because it comes from a great paper called Mindless Eating, and it's 226 point something in terms of the decisions you make around food and beverages. So there's a lot of real estate being taken up by decision making. So it again seems sensible to me to be looking at how can we make decisions a little bit easier and be clear. This is how coffee used to be in 1970s, and nowadays you've got all kinds of decisions because of the palaver that was set up once the three boys kicked off Starbucks in Seattle in 1971. Certainly put the blame on them. So looking at decision-making, shared decision-making, Paul Dijkstra's paper, I've just put a little highlight in the middle there around the shared decision-making, demonstrated how key it was for contextual factors to be considered, as well as risk and decision modifiers, which really maps nicely across our return to play consensus. Across on the right here, we've got Ben Steele-Turner's diagram, which I really liked, and talked to Ben a little bit around how it's really important we all pull in the same direction for optimal rehab. So with that, we've obviously, everyone's probably seen the Formula One team all working hard to manage the tyre change in the optimal time. And that's kind of what we're all doing, I think, in return to sport, particularly where we have the constraint of time, which is where salvageable injury becomes really key. Nicol and Phil Glasgow coined a term here that rehab is training in the presence of injury, and therefore optimal loading becomes key. And of course, there are so many ways to skin a cat in rehab. Even you can squat a cat, apparently, and that might be more optimal than trying to squat the way that the guy is on the other side. So there are various ways that we can load and that we can take people through the rehab process. That was a consensus that has burned forever embedded within ResearchGate. And it did at least allow us to look at return to sport information regarding optimal decision making. And since that's 7 years since that was published, we've got all kinds of risk modifiers for all kinds of stakeholders now being ploughed into a shared decision-making process with a non-linear return that we now would recognise. Plus, we talked around biopsychosocial, so this idea of the individual and of the context being really key across physical, but also the psychological and understanding the biology. So you need to keep all of those in mind, and anything I say here will keep that in mind. This must be one of the most copied pieces of that paper. It appears in loads of things, loads of papers, and has been updated in various ways, whether it's a calf muscle strain injury where we talk from the acute injury all the way through to return to play at the very end, and then return to performance, which is level 3, where we're trying to get people back to the stage they were prior to injury. We've already heard today the muscle doesn't return immediately on rehab. And there are other ways that people have demonstrated the 3 phases, and they've made them up to 9 and included gym and grass. This is a nice model I like from Marcus Walden, looking at key time points, and I'm going to reflect on that a little bit later. But I also needed to have a look at rugby, dive into the sport itself, look at the practices, look at barriers. And what we find up here is that really there's a poverty of research within rugby, in particular with return to sport, and a difficulty in predicting that. So we set about making better decisions, looking at salvageable injuries, and seeing if we weren't able to predict a little bit better than's been done previously. So how would we do that? Well, we started looking into the data in various ways. Data, obviously, has been looked at from an external load perspective. For a long time, we use of GPS devices. We use a StatSport system. But, of course, we're all now used to wearables, so some of us even trace ourselves and track our own metrics when we're running on a pitch for a match day. And you can see there I'm covering about 5K for a match. So it seems that GPS is a useful tool that we can use. This paper here talks around elite futsal and asks, are contextual factors in any way influential? And again, what they're looking at here is that when they're being exposed to high-intensity external loads, it is useful to look at accelerations and decelerations. So they would seem to be two metrics that, again, we picked up on the Harper paper here and Chris Carling, that accel and decel might be important for our muscle injury. And then looking at what our training and match load in professional rugby, this got us thinking about what is an average training week. So we actually started drilling down into what does an average training load look like for a player when they're healthy. And that's become key because what we often look at are match bandwidths to know what they hit at a weekend. And in rugby, it's a once-a-week exposure of match day, a bit like American football, rather than NBA or NHL, where they might be playing 3, 4, 5 times a week. So we were really interested in looking at this period of when the players are undergoing a period of health, what was their training average looking like? We also saw that if you get the prescription and the dose quite separate, quite different, this would be a discrepancy that could be costly. So we needed to avoid that. And we wanted to actually set some process goals. And again, literature demonstrates that we can have outcome goals far in the future, but if we handle the process goals, we're more likely to obtain performance goals and ultimately the outcome goals. So we really focused on some process goals within our group. And that inevitably led us into the wormhole around machine learning, artificial intelligence, or statistical regression, which much of it is currently. The very first study is at the top there in sport with AI, 1995, Lapham and Bartlett, and they demonstrated that there could be a use in decision-making for machine learning effectively. Coming through down to the right here, this paper that's not particularly clear is Van Etveld. It's quite recent, really good paper in terms of machine learning, and talks about how we've got to have a really wide consideration for the stats to have a good overview of any topic. And it does look into the likes of injury prevention and does look into the likes of performance. So AI or machine learning is looking at both of these areas. Very few studies, not great quality, and the actual collection of those, I've shown 4 of these different methods down here of collection, is not terribly great. But by use of some machine learning potential, we might be able to actually have a model that creates and assesses what our training regimes are like and what our rehab regimes are like. And that was because we also looked and said, well, there is an I in team. So the paper from Pat Ward from out in Seattle looked at the fact that actually individualization within a team sport is really important. I've really enjoyed today hearing people talk about the I, talking about the individual, because it really is critical. So it gave more weight to us looking at individual stats and metrics as opposed to just looking at gross. And we looked at sport-specific outdoor rehab, which is what we'll go on to in the example, and looking at whether the intentions of that, if we were intentional. Okay. Do I start again, or? So we want to look at outdoor rehab. That's the model we're going to be exploring. It does sound better in my ear. If we're intentional about that, will it match training load? Because that's what our hypothesis was, that would help us to a better return to sport event. So what did that lead us to? It led us to something we were terming augmented intelligence. Augmented in English means made bigger, made larger. So we wanted actually the intelligence to be larger, and that's the AI we're talking about here. So we were looking at, could we establish some drill fingerprints? If we established what the rehab drills were like and what they actually established from a metric perspective, could we be better prescriptors or managers, as we heard earlier? And then we wanted that I in team, so we wanted an individual signature, so we started building the database of the individual much more. And that would create, we suspected, an individualized, bespoke, and a contextualized program. So our milestones, data collection, no surprise there, started off on training load, and so we would get our drills from there, and conditioning load easy to establish, but we had to establish our rehab drill bank. So I worked very hard with our rehab specialist, the IRFU, to try and come up with a few, but not many, of the rehab drills, collect the data, and then examine it. That allowed us to have 4 steps to a program delivery from RTP1 using real-time tracker. And where that took us into was from the point the player's injured, we could put in the physio and a protected loading program with the gym, then move that rehab in as a reconditioning athlete, and we're very particular and intentional, deliberate about how we term our athletes. So the reconditioning athlete, we move into the on-feet rehab there, and you can see that the rehab starts at the end of that red box there. And we determined what the period of health training average was, and that's a 4-week average where they're green, which means that they are fit and available for training, and that would give us what that dotted line is up there. We then determined the planned length of rehab as was given prescribed by the physio staff, what the training schedule would also look like in our desired progression. There's an initial rough guess. The machine learning then has to take into account all of rehab sessions and also the individual. And then ultimately, it runs 10,000 iterations. So the 10,000 iterations per metric are made, modifying raw data. And this is where we can establish whether we're going to reach, as you can see, the predicted section in the white there. Can we get into a zone that is deemed safe by us and is also going to give them some degree of training value and then ultimately match value? I'll flick through the real world examples. They're non-Twitter anyway, but this is the rehab planning report and would give us the metrics that we're looking for. We would then run 3 simulations per session. So this is where the augmented intelligence comes in, because as a physio, we can deem some of these sessions are worthwhile, some of them are less worthwhile. So we would deem which one of those works, and that would allow us to set up the drills. So we had drill fingerprints for all of these drills then, and then alongside the individual, that would then give us a planner report, and at the end we could do a planned versus actual report with, to the right of the line, where exactly the planned versus actual landed. And I'm going to show one in here. The blue line is obviously their training, their real data, and you can see it drop off a cliff at injury. Through the red period, which should be for their protected loading in the rehab phase, but then we start moving in. So we have that linear progression, but we're following the predicted is through in the green, and the blue here is their actual, and these are for their acceleration. So we had this across a string of metrics. And this would be an example, just almost to finish here. We had a player playing 30 minutes since the end of May. He's then injured in a match on the 19th of August. So we then have that period, and the period goes, I'm thrilled to hear you say, it goes after the soft scar. We managed to get them back in just after the soft scar within that early RTP1 phase, out onto the field again and out into training. And then from that training, green, which fits Marcus's return to full training unmodified, from there we moved into playing at the 23rd in the 3rd match of our World Cup. So as you can see from the bottom there, he's absolutely delighted. And we wanted a bit of authentic athlete voice for this. And so you can see there, he was actually felt this was a process that he was able to buy into, and that he was able to understand where we were going with milestones. And when we reached them, we didn't just keep banging them. We were looking to where we would move. And he would also see the graph of where he needed to be. So he was thrilled about that and with our plan. Our data scientist is bottom left and usually not behind a laptop. Our sports scientist is to the right there with me, and we've got the handheld device for watching. And there's me with a player after the match. I thank the group who were with me in terms of the Irish medical team for backing a lot of stuff we come up with, and for suggesting that people in the field in shorts can actually contribute strongly towards the success. Really grateful for being able to be here again. Thank you for the invite, and happy to take any questions. And while we hear questions, if you want to hit the video here, if we take some questions, you can see how other animals use their muscles to change their bodies and shape. So thank you very much.
Stephen, thank you very much. Are there some questions?
It's the post-lunch slump slot.
Exactly.
I saw that, by the way. I know what you did there.
Yeah, exactly. The espresso is not working.
It's in for JB, not me.
Okay. I have a question.
Oh,
sure.
good.
Yeah, for sure. Now, I learned that you have a rehab plan. How you communicate that with the technical staff in a tournament? I mean, on a daily basis, or you have scheduled times where you can see the coaches, or how you manage that?
Yes, so we do have daily times to meet with the coaches, scheduled, so everyone knows what point we are going to be meeting. And that allows for the work of the day to have taken place, so we know where we are from how that day is, and we'll have met as a performance group. We'll have met initially in the medical group and then as a performance group to then take information in towards the head coach based on what we're now looking at. And there'll be that short term, what are we doing tomorrow, later this week, because we'll know what the micro plan is for the week, but we also know the macro. And what we'll all do in return to sport is have a date in mind, that outcome goal of where we're trying to get to with a player. So we're working back from that. And what this allows us to do is plan that really more effectively. So we're able to speak with confidence with the coach to say, he's coming back. And what we decree is that we have a full week of full training leading up to a match. So that's what our players will need to do. So we actually need to know what you do the week before to get them to that point. What do you do the week before that? So we can plan and structure those sessions in. And they're open table, they're open plan, and they're discussed with the players as well. So we can say, these are your 10 sessions, this is how we plan it. And this is, in almost all cases, they're not that interested in the graphs, and they've only got a reasonable interest in the fact that what the plan looks like. They like to know there's a plan. The coach likes to know there's a plan, and he likes to know that's the game you're heading for. This is a proof of concept idea. As we're developing these, then the coach is going to have much more confidence. The team has much more confidence around it that we can plan. And it was a bit like I was hearing something earlier on about we don't want too many drills, too many exercises, and that's it as well. We set only a small number of the drills and then had variations off that. And again, the augmented part of the intelligence is the group can decide, yeah, we need more of those accels in there. Look at the position. We need to have kicking. We need that drill to be more kick focused. So we'd be a group that communicates a lot within the performance team and then to the coaching staff.
Wow, thank you very much. Nicole has a question?
Unless somebody else wants to go.
Yeah, let someone else have a go.
Just go on, Nicole. That's okay.
So, Mutchy, why did we lose the court? No, I'm just kidding. I know that you've worked really hard. So the whole idea of shared decision making, right? So it's not as easy as just sitting everybody in the room, let's have a chat, and there we go. So could you speak a little bit to the process that you implemented around the team, and do you think it's been successful? What have you learned from that?
Yeah, I mean that is a very wide area, because to actually affect that sort of question, we instigated after-action reviews on a very regular basis. So our after-action review process, I effectively established from the US military, and it gave us a framework to be able to talk in an area of psychological security around how we felt injuries were, how we felt we could be progressing, and what's just happened. So there was a lot of look, listen, feel to that. And from the acute injuries on the match pitch, but also how are we dealing with the return to sport piece? So there was a really open, and that was started 2.5 years ago or so. So that was a really open process that allows us to dive into any of the injuries that we have. So that was probably one of the key parts, because we run everything through that process. So that aspect of it's important, and that is around decision conflict. So we would look at the decision and look at any conflicts within that, and then establish whether there's a lot of external pressure on us, whether there's internal pressure and we're feeling it, whether we are finding that there's a misunderstanding or a comprehension issue around something, and what the relationships are like peer-to-peer or to the staff or coaches or even to the players. So we ran everything through that, and then that allowed us to focus on having outcomes that were where people were accountable and were responsible for them. So we had named people at the end of each. So we ran that whole process. It's now been running for over 2 years, and it's very successful in us being able to look at decision-making in that scenario. And if we need to bring in people from out with medical, they'll be brought in for that as well. And obviously the spirit of collaboration for this World Cup was excellent. And I felt it's important, to your jokey point, it's important to separate the outcome pitch goal from the process goals, because I think we achieved process goals repeatedly, and I'm really proud of that. What happens on the field, the outcome was different, and yeah, obviously we felt that as well.
Stephen, thank you very much.